Disney has finally decided to greenlight the latest entry to Tim Allen's The Santa Claus franchise, aptly titled The Santa Clauses. With the new series on the imminent horizon, I decided it's time to take a look back at the franchise and see if it really holds up as well as I remember, as well as recap it so you don't have to sit through 5 hours of Santa Claus movies and only have to sit through however long this video is, if you want to watch the new series but don't want to rewatch all the old movies. But before we dive into it, let me know what your thoughts on the Santa Claus franchise are in the comments below. Did you grow up with it? Were you an adult when they came out? Or do you really just hate Martin Short as Jack Frost? The Santa Claus opens up with everyone's favorite Coke dealer, Tim Allen, everyone's favorite toy company marketing executive, Scott Calvin, addressing a room full of his colleagues at his company's annual Christmas party. Scott rushes home and meets his ex-wife and child on his doorstep. He has his son Charlie for the evening of Christmas Eve and part of Christmas morning. Charlie doesn't like this and would rather go back home to his mother and stepfather Neil as soon as possible. Neil wears ugly sweaters and is a psychiatrist who thinks Charlie is too old to believe in Santa anymore. Scott disagrees with this and thinks Charlie should be able to hold onto the magic a little bit longer. Scott cooks enough burnt food to feed a family of 4. Every restaurant is closed except for the sad Denny's that all the other single dads who burnt their dinner also take their kids to. The Denny's is out of everything that tastes good and Charlie continues to hate his father. Scott reads his disappointed child a bedtime story and Charlie can't get past the phrase, "A rose, such a clatter." Tim Allen turns off the lights and lets his child ruminate in his stupidity. Uh-oh, there's someone on the roof. Home invaders beware. Tim Allen has a shotgun and he's not afraid to use it. Timmy scares Santa off the roof, who accidentally kicks off the sheet of fake snow because they filmed this during the summer. Santa f***ing dies, and Scott rummages around, finding his business card before Charlie drags him up a magically appearing rose such a clatter. Turns out there's a sleigh and reindeer on the roof, and old Santa force ghosts his way out of the situation. Tim Allen, still in his boxers, is kidnapped by Santa's reindeer and forced to do their bidding after he puts on dead Santa's suit to avoid freezing to death or exposing himself to minors. Scott is whisked away on a magical globe-spanning adventure where he delivers presents to children and tells a little girl he's lactose intolerant. After finishing the other Santa's unfinished business, Scott and Charlie are whisked away to the North Pole and Scott is informed by the head elf Bernard that he has until Thanksgiving next year to sort his mortal affairs. Scott objects to this, and that's when he's informed of a clause hidden on the card he picked up. The Santa Claus. Whoever puts on the suit becomes the new Santa, whether they like it or not. The father and son duo go to sleep and wake up back at Scott's house, where Scott is convinced it's a dream until he gets out of bed to find he's still wearing the monogram Santa Claus pajamas he was given at the North Pole by an elf named Judy. Charlie super excitedly shares everything that happened with his mother and Neil on Christmas morning, and they are not happy considering that they tried to break the illusion of Santa Claus just earlier that week. As the 11 months until Scott sheds his mortal form and transcends to godhood play out, Scott's body begins to physically transform and his personality is altered by Christmas magic as he slowly becomes more and more like the traditional Santa Claus figure of modern myth, including an insatiable hunger for sweets. This is a cause of great concern for Scott, his doctor, his co-workers, and everyone else in his life that isn't Charlie. It's especially concerning for Laura and Neil, who think that Scott is drastically changing his appearance on purpose to make Charlie love him more and get his visitation rights stripped away. Scott and Bernard kidnap Charlie sometime in mid-November, and the three start final preparations for Christmas with the help of the rest of the elves. Meanwhile, Laura and Neil are fully cooperating with the ongoing police investigation to find their missing son. By Christmas Eve, Scott has been fully taken over by the spirit of Christmas and gets arrested for kidnapping and child endangerment when he delivers presents to Laura and Neil's house. Nobody believes that Scott is actually Santa, and the effective liberating flight squad, or as they put it in the movie,
elves with attitude,
breaks Santa out, and he proves that he's Santa to Laura and Neil. Laura burns the custody papers, so Scott gives Neil a tiny winner and flies off to deliver the rest of the world's Christmas presents. And everyone lived merrily ever after. I'm going to take the 6 years between the Santa Claus and the Santa Claus 2 to go over some fun facts. The role of Scott Calvin wasn't always going to be played by Tim Allen. Initially, he was offered to both Chevy Chase and Bill Murray. Chevy Chase had to decline due to scheduling conflicts, and Bill Murray declined because he didn't think it was funny. The decision to cast Tim Allen actually caused Disney to make sort of an exception to their rules, as Tim Allen had previously been convicted in federal prison following a plea bargain where he ratted out over 20 fellow drug dealers during his time as a cocaine smuggler and distributor. By 1994, Tim Allen's coke-laden past wasn't really an issue anymore because he was also the star of the #1 show on television at that time, Home Improvement. Also, although the reindeer and the Santa Claus are done with CGI and animatronics, there are a couple wide shots in the movie where the reindeer are actually stand-ins borrowed from the Toronto Zoo. In the version of the movie originally released in theaters, Scott is handed a phone number at one point, and he remarks, 1-800-SPANK-ME. I think I've heard of that before. This scene was cut or modified in every subsequent release of the film because it turned out to be a real working phone sex line, and children discovered that the hard way. But enough about phone sex, it's time for the Santa Claus 2. 6 years later, with 28 days left until Christmas and Santa's workshop approaching his final sets of toy productions, things are busy as ever at the North Pole. We're introduced to Bernard's right-hand man, the third highest ranking member of the North Pole Communist Party, Curtis. Curtis is the right-hand man of the right-hand man, and although 2 wrongs don't make a right, 2 rights can make a wrong because he's introduced through a display of gross incompetence, playing a Christmas song when dead silence is ordered to maintain North Pole secrecy. Curtis also continues to be a screw-up by not informing Santa of the second clause until he has less than a month to fulfill it. Failure to do so would result in the end of Scott's tenure as Santa, and the decimation of Christmas as a holiday. What is the second clause, you may ask? Well, that's simple. It's just Santa learns that Charlie is on the naughty list and is deeply upset since he'll have to take time off during his busiest time of year to deal with it. Anyways, the second clause is that Santa has to get married. Not a sham wedding either. This has to be true love or it doesn't count. At a meeting of the Council of Legendary Figures, Santa brings up these woes to his colleagues. The Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, the Sandman, Cupid, Father Time, and Mother Nature. Gee, this sounds familiar for some reason. I have to ponder whether or not the other legendary figures operate under the same rules as Santa Claus, especially because the Tooth Fairy wants to change his legendary name. Was he just a regular dentist who put on the old Tooth Fairy's lab coat and had this responsibility thrust upon him? Scott flies back to Illinois on Comet, but not wanting to leave Bernard and Curtis in charge alone, he creates a toy clone of himself, complete with toy genitalia, to act as a figurehead so none of the elves get wise to the power vacuum. Back in Illinois, we meet Charlie's half-sister Lucy, who thinks Scott is Santa but can't quite prove it, and Charlie's school principal Carol, who's a bit of a rule stickler. Scott has started to regain color in his hair and lost a lot of weight in his beard. The concern over this by Carol, who doesn't know he's Santa, is brushed off with a single line and a little bit of Christmas hand-waving. Since Scott is desantifying, he only has a limited amount of magic left, and if he runs out, he can't go back to the North Pole by magic. Speaking of the North Pole, Toy Santa is doing well as a puppet to be operated by Bernard and Curtis, and follows all of their orders until he doesn't and secretly uses the machine that he was created in to form his own Gestapo made of toy soldiers. Back in Illinois, Charlie is still a bit of a punk and gets in trouble again, which forces Scott to spend more time with Carol after a series of miserable dates and leads to him performing several Christmas miracles in order to impress her as he slowly drains all of his magic. These miracles include knowing a random child's name, summoning a horse-drawn carriage, making it snow on their carriage and only their carriage, and giving all of the depressed faculty members at the school the perfect Christmas gifts. Among these gifts is a doll Carol mentioned to him less than an hour prior, and instead of being creeped out by the vast stores of personal information he had to have stolen prior to actually meeting her, she falls in love. And that love lasts all the way until he reveals that he's Santa Claus, and she kicks him out for trying to do a mean-spirited joke. Back in the North Pole, Toy Santa has gone full fascist and is planning to deliver coal to every child in the world on Christmas. With less than a day left until Christmas, Curtis flies to Illinois to grab Scott and take him back, but destroys his jetpack by accident. No worries, they'll just take Comet. Uh-oh, Comet is too fat to fly. No worries, they'll just rip out one of Scott's teeth and hold the Tooth Fairy at gunpoint to take them back. Uh-oh, Scott has good dental hygiene. No worries, Lucy just happens to lose a tooth and serves her entire purpose for being written into the script. Scott dismantles Toy Santa's regime with the help of the elves and Charlie, who also held the Tooth Fairy at gunpoint, and Toy Santa is stopped just in time to prevent every child in the world from getting coal. The reindeer are shown to be somewhat intelligent in this universe, so that means they were in on the plan the whole time. Scott is still just a regular dude though, so he can't deliver the presents. But don't worry, Charlie brought Carol with him, and she believes everything now. She's put on the spot to marry a man who she met less than a month ago, and accepts with the sole goal of saving Christmas. Sure, the fact that it works means it's true love according to the rules of the second clause, but it's still weird, right? Santa goes to deliver the toys, and everyone lives merrily ever after for real this time, except for Toy Santa, who is condemned to eternal damnation in the credits. More fun facts time. Scott is the public-facing version of Santa Claus in this world. Toys use his likeness, and there are even novelty shirts printed with his face on them. The fact that nobody recognizes him as at least the guy who models as Santa is weird. Also, Scott borrows one of Neil's sweaters for the date, and you can see that it's a Coogie sweater. Coogie is an Australian fashion brand with, let's just say, high price tags, which means Neil's absolutely raking it in as a psychiatrist. The movie portrays the lack of Christmas decorations at Charlie's school as a spiteful decision made by Carol, until she retorts back with the fact that it's an underfunded public school. I went to an underfunded public school, and the closest thing to holiday decorations was a cork board with a bunch of paper cutouts on it, so Scott's just kind of being an asshole every time he brings this up. Santa is referred to in the movie as making kids 86% happier than the previous Santa. This, combined with the lack of a Mrs. Claus in the first movie, have led to a bit of a fan theory. The theory being that the elves had the previous Santa killed to replace him with Scott because he was doing such a poor job. This doesn't really hold up when you look at the first movie, because the old Santa didn't actually die, and he probably just realized he sucked at the job and retired early. Final fun fact, this movie wasn't always called The Santa Claus 2. It was initially marketed for one trailer as The Santa Claus 2: The Escape Clause, a subtitle that would go on to be used by the ill-fated third movie in the franchise. The Santa Claus 3 opens up with Carol teaching a group of elf children math. Notably, this confirms that elves just stopped growing at age 9 to 12, and Bernard was an early bloomer. Bernard also isn't in this movie. He's confirmed to be returning for the Santa Clauses, which means he isn't dead and probably just retired. The real-world reason why Bernard wasn't in this movie is because actor David Krumholtz was too busy filming the TV show Numbers to appear in a subpar children's movie. The kids don't want to learn, so they ask Mrs. Claus to tell them a story, and she obliges. It was a few weeks before Christmas, 2006. Carol is pregnant and Scott rushes her to the delivery room only for it to be a false alarm. Carol is depressed that the only human contact she's had in months is Scott, and even he's debatably human. The elves all treat Santa like a cult leader, and Scott and Carol have a face-shaped chimney. Scott decides to invite Carol's parents to the North Pole, but has to figure out how to keep up the illusion that Santa isn't real. But uh-oh, there's a sassy baka among us, and the Council of Legendary Figures calls an emergency meeting in Santa's kitchen. God, that line pained me. Jack Frost, as played by Martin Short, is voted out of the council for trying to usurp Christmas, but upon learning about the existence of an escape clause, he pleads guilty and gets community service in Santa's workshop instead. Santa enlists Sandman to kidnap Carol's parents, drugging them and trafficking them across international borders. He wakes them up and gaslights them into thinking the North Pole is Canada. God also brings along Laura, Neil, and Lucy, and presumably Charlie, but he really only cameos in this movie. I watched The Santa Claus 3 less than 12 hours before I wrote this segment of the video, and my brain managed to repress all of it in that time. You can still trust me when I say these next few sentences play out for much longer than they need to in the actual movie. Jack Frost disrupts Santa's entire workshop and personal life, sending everything into disarray in an attempt to get Scott to enact the escape clause. Jack tricks Curtis into telling him how the escape clause works and steals Scott's magic snow globe after he shows it to Lucy. While stealing the snow globe, Jack Frost murders Laura and Neil. Normally when I say this, it's an over-exaggeration for comedic purposes, but for all intents and purposes, this is a cold-blooded murder from Jack's perspective. When disrupting everything Scott knows and loves doesn't work, Jack Frost tricks Scott into enacting the escape clause by getting him to say,
"So, you wish you'd never become Santa at all?"
while holding a gift box containing the snow globe. Here we are, the interesting part, and we only have 30 minutes left in the film. Frost and Scott travel back in time to the first movie, where Santa deflating is retconned to happen about a minute earlier than it actually did. Jack knocks Scott out with a shovel and steals Santa's suit, rewriting history, so this time-traveling version of Jack Frost became Santa instead of Scott. Notably, it is the time-traveling version of Jack Frost that becomes Santa. This timeline's version of Jack Frost still exists out there somewhere. Scott finds himself staring at a mirror, horrified by the sight of Tim Allen. In this alternate future, Scott remained an asshole for 12 years rather than Santa magically making him a better person. Laura and Neil divorced, Carol is God knows where, and the writers refuse to give Charlie more than 5 lines. Quick sideline. In the first movie, Scott isn't exactly the world's greatest father, and he leaves most of the parenting to Laura and Neil, but he still very clearly cares for Charlie. He does his best to give his son a good Christmas. He makes it clear that he thinks it's okay that Charlie still believes in Santa. He plays along with everything that Charlie wants him to do during his test run as Santa, and he goes out of his way to find a compromise with his son to quit bringing up the fact that he's Santa without belittling him. The idea that he would neglect his son for 12 years doesn't sit right with me. It makes me think that the writers just wanted to up the stakes without having to think about the characterization of Scott pre-Santa. Scott learns that Jack Frost has turned the North Pole into a Christmas-themed resort where parents can pay to get their kids on the nice list and to do inhumane things to elves since they don't have human rights. Curtis tries to sell him a pen that can record audio clips. Staunch conservative Tim Allen gazes in horror at what the banals of greed and capitalism have done to the North Pole and vows to destroy it. Scott enlists the help of alternate timeline Lucy, who doesn't know him beyond being Charlie's estranged father, to steal Jack Frost's snow globe. The plan goes off without a hitch, and Scott uses the pen from before to secretly record Jack while he was gloating and triggers the escape clause one last time. The entire interesting part of the movie lasts for less than 20 minutes. Curtis finds Laura and Neil's corpses, and Jack gloats that they can't be unfrozen because he can't be unfrozen. Lucy says bet and hugs him, dethaling him and saving her parents. The heartwarming display inspires everyone to resolve their issues. Scott reveals that he's Santa to Carol's parents, the Easter Bunny hits on Carol's mom, and Carol delivers the baby. Carol's baby is named Buddy, so the writers can remind you that you're actively choosing to watch a worse Christmas movie than Elf. And everyone lives merrily ever after, for real this time except not, because Disney Plus needs more Christmas specials to pad out holiday 2022. That's probably everything you'll need to know for the Santa Clauses. Probably, maybe, hopefully. Heck, it's probably actually a lot more than you do need to know. These movies have never exactly stuck to a lore bible, and each new entry adds an unnecessary amount of complicated lore. I really don't expect the Disney Plus series to be any different. If you watched all this, you must be a fan of Disney movies. In that case, you should watch my incredibly harsh review of The Jungle Cruise. Also, like and subscribe. I put a lot of hours into this, and I can't even make pennies off of it until I meet YouTube's monetization requirements.